hear the same arguments about the PV5150 all of the time, and it is endless. The Blockletter is the greatest amp ever. The 6505 is the exact same thing. No, they're completely different. It just goes on and on and on. It's a debate that has raged on for literally decades in recording studios, rehearsal spaces, online, and it has caused countless guitar players to spend thousands chasing ghosts. So what's the truth? Is there some magical, irreplaceable quality to those original amps from the early 90s? Will we ever truly top the Blockletter 5150, arguably the amp that helped shape the sound of modern metal? The short answer is it's complicated, but the real answer, the one we're going to explore in this video today, is one that might save you a bunch of money, endless hours arguing online, and help you focus on what actually makes a great guitar tone. For those that don't know me, I'm Eyal Levi, CEO of URM Academy. I've been a producer and a guitarist in my band Doth since 1999, and have been playing way longer than that. And one of my go-to amps for years, one that I've used on countless records and on tour, has been the original Blockletter 5150. So trust me, I get the hype, I have heard the magic, and I've felt the difference, but I've also seen firsthand how the legend can sometimes overshadow reality. And what do I mean by that? Well, stay tuned and I'll explain. This is a situation where details matter a lot. Let's start by acknowledging the legend. Why do so many people, myself included, believe that the original Blockletter is so unique and special? Well, to really get it, you need to understand the world that it was born into. Back in the 80s and early 90s, if you wanted a really high gain badass metal tone, you couldn't just go buy one off the shelf. The music was getting heavier, faster, and more aggressive, but the gear hadn't caught up yet. The default solution was to take an amp, usually a Marshall JCM 800, and push it to do things it was never ever designed to do. This meant cranking it to 10 the entire time and or hiring amp techs to do what was called hot rodding or modifying the amp. They would literally solder in extra gain stages, mess with the transformers, mess with the power supply, and you would have to slam the front end with a pedal just to get enough saturation. But this created a massive problem, especially for serious touring artists. These mods were notoriously inconsistent and unreliable. One tech's mod would sound completely different from another's. One amp would sound great one night and then completely fall apart the next. It was a constant battle. Eddie Van Halen, arguably the most influential guitarist of his generation, got sick of it. He had discovered the Soldano SLO 100, an amp that proved his ideal tone was possible, and it inspired him to design his own signature model. He was tired of the endless, unreliable Marshall mods and wanted an amp that was aggressive, precise, articulate, and brutally heavy right out of the box. He wanted to build something that was designed from the ground up with that sound and that was durable enough for the rigors of the road. So he partnered with Peavey and their lead engineer James Brown and created a whole new type of amp. And here's a quote from James Brown himself. "The biggest difference over amps by our peers was that this one had an extra tube in the preamp to give it a lot more gain. A lot of the metal bands found that they could crank it to get seriously thick and heavy metal tones." Let that sink in. Most amps of the time had 3 preamp stages before the phase inverter. The 5150 had 4 plus the inverter, which isn't just a splitter, it's another tube that adds serious gain when you push it. That's 5 as opposed to 4 stages of saturation before the power tubes even get touched. What was really revolutionary about this was that they did all this while keeping the low end response super tight. One of the biggest problems with high gain amps is that when you start palm muting, they can become a woofy, chaotic low end mess. The 5150 was designed from circuit board up to control that low end and give you that signature punch without the mud. But they didn't stop by just adding an extra tube. Older amps were biased hot. They relied on cooking the power tubes for their distortion. That gave you warmth and sag, but it also made the low end loose and muddy. And you had to crank them to insane volumes to get them there. And by insane, I mean fucking insane. The 5150 flipped that philosophy. Its 4 6L6s were biased cold, which meant the power section stayed clean, loud, and tight. All the distortion and tone shaping happened in the preamp and inverter. The power tubes just slammed that sound into the speakers with massive headroom. That's why the 5150 was a revolution. It gave you brutal gain at any volume, percussive low end without the woof, and it delivered a consistency that the older amps just could not. When it was released in 1992, it completely took over, and it started an arms race among amp companies, with Mesa Boogie answering it with the dual rectifier, another legend. The 5150 had that tight mid-range punch, while the Recto had a looser, bigger, more scooped sound. sound. For the next decade, those two amps were the sound of metal. But here's where the debate starts. After Eddie's partnership with PV ended, they had to rename the 5150, so they called it the 6505. But are they the same? People swear up and down that they're identical, and I've argued with people a lot about this. They are the same on paper. All the different 5150 and 6505 variants are great amps, but in my opinion, they feel and sound different, and there are some very real theories as to why. One popular theory revolves around the transformers. Every tube amp has a power transformer and an output transformer, and these handle the amp's voltage and how the final signal gets sent to the speakers. They have a huge impact on the thump and sizzle of the amp and how it feels to play. Over a production run of more than a decade, it's highly plausible that the suppliers for these big iron and copper components changed. Even if a part has the same name on paper, the same specs, a change in the factory or something in the supply line, a different batch of raw materials can lead to small variations in performance. Second, and this is a big one, is what's known as component tolerance. The smaller components in an amp circuit, the resistors, capacitors, transistors, they're not 100% perfect. They operate within a certain tolerance, maybe 5% or 10%. So a resistor that's supposed to be 100 ohms might actually be 95 or 105 ohms in the real world. Now multiply that by hundreds of tiny components in a complex high-gain amp. It's like the idea of death by 1,000 cuts. All those tiny, imperceptible differences add up across the entire circuit board to create an amp with a unique character. Finally, the third reason is just the simple factor of age and that anecdotal vibe or mojo that guitar players talk about. Over 30 years, these components drift. They get broken in by heat, vibration, and constant use. This gradual drift can change the amp's response and its EQ curve, much like a vintage guitar or violin just settles in and gets what many players describe as better feel with age. An amp from 1992 is a well-worn, seasoned veteran, and this is the fundamental difference between the digital and analog worlds. If you copy and paste a piece of code, it's identical every time, but when you manufacture a physical object like an amp, you're using a blueprint to create something in the real world. The map is not the territory. Every single unit will have tiny, unique variations. So yes, the legend is real. There is something special and unique about those old amps. That 5 to 10% vibe or mojo is not just in people's heads. But here's the reality check, and this is the part that might save you from spending too much money on a vintage amp. In a real-world practical recording scenario, those differences between the 5150s and 6505s are way more subtle than the internet would have you believe. And don't forget, the amp is just one part of a long signal chain. The story you'll hear from engineers who were or still are working with real amps is that tracking guitars could be an incredibly intense process. Big studios would have an arsenal of amps and cabs, and they would spend days, not hours, days doing shootouts. They would test different amp heads with different speaker cabinets. They'd test different microphones, because even two SM57s can sound slightly different from each other. They would test every single speaker on every single cabinet. They tested with the guitarist's specific guitar and pickups. It was a long, painstaking process to find the absolute perfect combination for that specific player, playing that specific riff for that specific song. And in many of the shootouts, I'd say like 80% of the time, a clear winner emerged. More often than not, people were going to a 5150 with an oversized Mesa cab with vintage 30s in it, with an SM57 and some sort of a Tube Screamer style overdrive in front, because it just worked. It sounded great. It had the aggression, the size, and the clarity you needed for modern metal. But the key here is that it won a shootout against other great amps for a specific context. If you have the ability to test out multiple versions of the same or similar amp and are going for an edge of 2 to 5% or 10% at best, then that's great. More power to you. However, in a dense, aggressive metal mix, that last 10% of vintage magic can get lost pretty damn fast. The truth is, all those different models of 5150 and 6505 are so incredibly close that you can solve for the tiny differences with just a bit of EQ. Think about it. Even two block letter 5150s from the same year will sound slightly different from each other because of all the physical variations we just talked about. Does that make one of them useless? Of course not. Just use your ears, turn the knobs, and dial the tone. In one blind test video I saw on Kyle Bull's channel, he put up a 5150 block letter against a bunch of the variants, and well, here are the results.
Even though in the video they sounded super close to identical, and overall, does it really matter that much? No, it really doesn't matter, like, at all.
There are differences, but the differences are not a deal breaker. Like I said earlier, the amp is just one part of a much longer chain. The player, the guitar, the pickups, the cabinet, the speakers, the microphone, the mic placement, and your EQ choices in the mix all have a massive impact. A great player is going to sound great through any version of a 5150. A bad player with sloppy technique is going to sound like shit, even through a holy grail Eddie Van Halen owned original block letter.
I was working on the Balance record with Bruce Fairbairn, and Ed walked out of the room, and Bruce said we needed to punch in one guitar chord. So I said, yeah. I go, well, he's using this amp, and it wasn't anything, you know, it's just an amp, a small Music Man cable, and his Music Man guitar through a Marshall amp. Bruce plugs into the guitar, and the guitar tone it's night and day. It's like not even the same thing. And Bruce looks at me and goes, that's not a good guitar tone. I go, yeah, it is. And he goes, no, it's not. And he's kind of getting mad at me because I'm saying, but it is. That's what we use. And Ed walks into the studio and goes, no, that's what I used. And then he hits the chord and it's perfect. And I'm going, yeah, see, it's all in the hands.
And to take the differences between the amps a step further, well, let's just say that this also applies to amp sims. When you see a 5150 from one company like Grin Digital and another from Neural DSP, they sound completely different, right? That's because they're all modeling different physical amps. Each company got their hands on a specific 5150 with its own unique history, its own component drift, and its own sonic character, and they modeled that specific unit. There's no single definitive 5150 sound, only a spectrum of closely related, incredible high-gain tones. So here's the final verdict. Will we ever top the block letter 5150? Maybe. Maybe not. But the more important question is, what makes these amps so timeless? The DNA shared by all the models is what truly matters. The real magic of the 5150 isn't in one specific production run from 1992, but in its fundamental design philosophy. That gain structure, the mid-range voicing, and the groundbreaking low-end control are the amp's true legacy. In fact, that design from 1992 is arguably even more relevant today than it was back then. With bands using 7, 8, and even 9-string guitars, and with playing getting faster and more percussive, there is more low-end information in metal than ever before. An amp that can handle that low end with clarity and aggression is not just a luxury, it's a necessity, and the 5150 was built for that from day one. The original block letter is an icon. It has its place in metal history, and it definitely has its own special character. But any amp from the 5150-6505 family is going to get you 95% of the way there and sound phenomenal, be really reliable, and thankfully, for the most part, pretty affordable. So my advice to you is to stop obsessing over which version you have or which version you want to buy. Stop chasing that holy grail block letter on reverb.com for insane prices. The real skill is not in owning the right amp, but in knowing how to use your ears to dial any of them in to serve the song you're working on right now. Your hands, your ears, and your skills are infinitely more important than the serial number on the back of the chassis. Learning how to use your ears and make those smart EQ decisions to make great gear like this work in a professional mix is exactly what we focus on every single month at Nail the Mix. We get the actual multi-track sessions from huge bands like Gojira, Lamb of God, and Periphery, and the world-class producers who mix them. You know, guys like Will Putney, Jens Bogren, and Nolly Getgood, and they show you exactly how they did it step by step. It's the closest thing you can get to a real-world mentorship in metal production. So if you're serious about taking your skills to the next level and learning how these tones actually come together on your favorite records, go check us out at nailthemix.com. Link is in the description. All right, that's it for me. Let me know what you think about the 5150 debate. I want to hear your thoughts on it. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.